Traders, how are you? Marcello, founder of the Day Trading Academy. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. Overall, another week that was primarily affected by the coronavirus. We're starting to kind of spill over. In other words, I did a video about what I thought happened. Thanks for all your comments as well. If there's any other kind of videos you guys want me to upload, just go ahead and put it in the comments. Hashtag Ask Marcello. You guys can search for me on Instagram, Marcello Arrambide English, and I'll be able to go ahead and do that for you. Monday was a U.S. holiday, so most of the markets were closed, especially stocks. The futures market was open, but only for half a day. There wasn't too much movement there. On Tuesday, we had U.S. stocks lower as investors are starting to become aware that a lot of U.S. firms now have a lot of exposure to China, and they may no longer meet their first quarter earnings expectations. So basically, companies are now saying, well, what's happening in China is a big problem, and now it's going to start to affect our money as well. There's been now over 75,000 cases of infections in China, now over 2,200 deaths, unfortunately. And as I told you guys before, I don't think that this hasn't reached its peak just yet. On Wednesday, U.S. stocks are higher. The S&P 500 and the NASDAQ hit record highs on a renewed investor optimism that China is now going to start taking steps to be able to basically put money in, inject money into the economy to kind of limit the economic impact of the coronavirus. On Thursday, we had U.S. stocks take an absolute dive. Again, because of the coronavirus, Apple also reported that sales of the iPhone has taken a hit of about 40-50%. And Goldman Sachs is now putting forth the idea that a 10% near-term correction is more probable from the peak that we've had due to the situation that's going on in the world economy and also with the coronavirus more than anything. The U.S. indices for a week, the Dow is negative, the S&P 500 is negative, the NASDAQ also positive for now. I'm recording this on a Friday. So, the numbers might change a little bit higher or lower. Since Trump was elected in November 2016, U.S. stock indices have expanded enormously. The Dow is up 60%, the S&P 500 is up 58%, and the NASDAQ is up 87%. Now, remember, I never want to get political on these videos because I think we have enough of that political fighting on the news and everywhere else. But one of the things that I want to mention is whether you hate Trump or love Trump or you're left or right, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we have seen a certain amount of results under his watch, and we got to give him credit for it. So let's keep that in mind because at the end of the day, I think all of us like the stock market to go up, right? Even though I don't think that's going to last in the next few years. Market valuation has increased over a whopping $12 trillion so far. In overseas market news, for the most part, mostly the same thing with the coronavirus. I think what's actually happening now with the coronavirus is the same thing as what's happened with Brexit, right? We kind of just keep having this back and forth. At the end of the day, it's definitely affecting the economy. It's going to get worse before it gets better, as I told you guys in that video on the coronavirus. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency news. Bitcoin is lower this week, 6.42%. Went to about 9,600 or so. It didn't get above 10,000 for too long, even though some analysts were predicting it was going to get to $50,000 again. And it's still up near 35% so far this year. Very, very volatile. It's actually become a little bit more volatile so far this year. Financial and banking news. Eurozone finance ministers discussed on Monday for more growth-friendly fiscal policy, which is essentially a move to make Germany spend more after fears of a downturn and also arguing for more measures of austerity. The past few years has been about austerity. China's Shanghai index closed at 1.84% positive on Thursday after the Central Bank of China decided to lower their benchmark lending rates. The one-year prime loan rate went from 4.15 to 4.05%, and the five-year went from 4.8 to 4.75. And on Monday, they also lowered interest rates for the one-year medium-term lending facility that the Central Bank of China funds for the lending institutions, the financial institutions. That went down from 3.25% to 3.15%. And U.S. Treasury yields traded lower this morning on Thursday as they inverted once again. Remember, if you guys are new to this or kind of the economy and finance, when the short term, the U.S. government has bonds, right, that they sell. That's essentially federal government debt. When the short-term rates go up and the long-term rates go down, when that happens, it means it inverts. And that's generally has been an indication that a recession is on the horizon. Now, because of what's going on with the economy and also because of the interest rates, remember that we still have trillions of dollars in federal government loans, state country loans that are negative, especially in Europe. The US dollar hit fresh highs this week. It went up to a 3-year high, climbed over 7% this year because more than anything due to the coronavirus. The United States dollar is still considered a safe haven. I always say that it's the least dirty shirt in the dirty closet. And the Fed meeting indicated that they're going to leave rates unchanged. And a lot of people were considering that they were going to drop the rate so far this year, at least one cut, which I think now they're going to have to do, even though they reported that they weren't going to do it. Morgan Stanley is down 2% today as well, as they decided to buy the e-broker E-Trade for $13 billion in a move to cater to everyday Americans. Remember that Morgan Stanley, TD Ameritrade and Schwab did a deal as well. So there's a huge consolidation that's occurring right now in the industry. E-Trade rose over 26% on the news, and that's after the $26 billion merger I just told you guys about between Schwab and TD Ameritrade. Commodities are up for the week. U.S. crude is up over 3%. International Brent is also up 3% as well. Gold prices in the last year have soared, especially above the 1,600 level once again. Gold went from 1,281 to 1,509 in just 2019. It was close to an 18% gain. At the end of January 2020, it was up over 1,583, pushing up against a 23.5%. And that actual time frame beat the Dow in the same time frame as well, even though the Dow has gone up immensely. Rhodium and palladium also skyrocketed as well. Palladium rose 40% this year, while rhodium rose 110% year to date. And for the week, precious metals are up over 2% and silver up close to 3.5% overall. Remember, I told you about the mining stocks that I'm into. And remember, this is for educational purposes only. This isn't trading advice. We don't trade people's money, none of that. The regulators want us to keep an eye on that as well. And another thing as well that I wanted to ask you guys, I don't know if you guys read this week as well, that the FTC charged Online Trading Academy over, I think it was $300 million for false advertising. If you guys want me to do a video about that, I'll definitely do that as well if you want to. In economic news, Japanese economy declined in its fastest pace for the near 6 years. Last Q4, it contracted at 6.3%. There was a sales tax hike that hit the consumer and business spending, and also now more of a risk, as if you guys don't know, Japan has been doing what the Europeans and the Americans started to do in 2009. They literally had a lost decade. They just keep injecting more and more and more money into the economy. They have a certain advantage because most of their debt is interior. It's not exterior, meaning that it's all people's savings, for example, that have gone to the debt, rather than China or the United States buying Japanese debt, where the U.S. is backwards, right? We have a lot of foreign debt holders, but debt is still debt, and obviously it's not a good thing. So the coronavirus is definitely damaging both Japan's manufacturing output and tourism sectors. Investors now are asking how quickly China is going to be able to get back on its track. The economy is working at about 40 to 50% of capacity. The total pandemic, a lot of people are worried now what it's going to do to the global economy. Many factories still aren't working due to lack of staff, with also workers trapped in their hometowns or weeks of quarantine. Now, and other than that, the unemployment benefits rose modestly last week, increasing to just 4,000, with a seasonally adjusted number of 210,000 for the week, suggesting sustained labor growth, as well as how that's going to support the economy amid the risk of the coronavirus and the weak business investment. Corporate news, Virgin Galactic soared 20% at one time on Tuesday. It's had a 7-day winning streak on optimism that the company is going to start the commercial space business, charging tourists to take them up to space. The stock is up 157% in 2020, 185% since October, in its IPO, even though the company is still unprofitable and continue to expect it to lose money in 2020 and 2021. This is something that's going to definitely affect a lot of these kind of startup companies, because once we have the economic contraction, the recession, there's not going to be all this easy money lying around anymore to finance these projects that aren't profitable. HSBC is saying that it's going to cut around 35,000 jobs after it's going to shift its focus to its main business hubs in the Middle East and Asia. Their profit plunged by a third in 2019, and they're also planning on cutting 15% of its workforce, about 200,000 people in the next 3 years. So if you work for HSBC, I would definitely be looking for another job. Other than that, they're going to shift resources to the Middle East and Asia, as I mentioned to you, which is where the majority of the profit is currently coming from. It's expected to cost them about $7.2 billion in 2022, by 2022, to be able to go ahead and do that restructuring. And Tesla got an approval from a German court to be able to go ahead and continue their construction of cutting down a forest just outside of Berlin to construct their first European car and battery factory after they were shut down with an injunction from environmentalists. This is a win for Tesla, not a win for environmentalists. In technology, the U.S. Department of Justice reported that Oracle is pivoting, the Supreme Court, is pivoting towards Oracle in their Supreme Court case against Google. This is a case about how Google is using Java and Android. If you guys don't know, that's the majority of the phones that we use on Android. For those of you guys that use the Apple iPhones, that's a different technology. Oracle is arguing that the tech giant copied 11,500 lines of code over the last 10 years, and Google is claiming that it was illegal to use under the fair use doctrine. This is a case that is going to mark not the territory, it's going to mark what's going to happen in a lot of other cases in the future, because we're now in a new digital economy. In investment news, number of U.S. firms that are warning investors about their Q1 sales has gone up. Apple is an example. They said that they're not going to meet their revenue guidance due to the fact that their sales have collapsed in China for their iPhones. Stores have been closed in China, and they're also facing supply chain issues. If you guys don't know, a lot of the stuff that we buy, a lot of the parts and everything is made in China. And the loss of the company's stock price is about $34 billion. That could happen if this actually does occur. Naguib Sarissi is Egypt's second richest person with a net worth of $5.1 billion. And now that the rules and regulations are starting to change in Egypt about mining, a lot of his companies are going to want to get in there as well. So that's definitely some changes in Egypt that's occurring if you guys want to have a few extra dollars to invest in Egypt. And Thursday, France and Germany signed a $150 million, $150 million. I'll repeat that again. 150 million euro to be able to develop the next prototype of the next generation fighter jet. It's seen as a way for Europe to defend itself and without relying on allies. If you guys know, Trump has been very vocal about how he doesn't want to continue to defend if they don't pay. And also the situation with NATO, where a lot of countries aren't paying their fair share. And so they're going to use the companies Dassault Aviation and Airbus to be able to go ahead and build the aircraft and make it operational by 2040 in the ever increasingly uncertain world. And that's going to replace the Germany's Eurofighter warplanes over time and Dassault's Rafale airplanes as well. And China's steelmaker are in the biggest crisis in years, as they're still producing a ton of steel and nobody is buying it. That obviously we had the situation and the collapse in the economy in China due to the coronavirus outbreak. Even though they are still producing steel, that means that there's far few buyers of steel, which means that there's millions of tons of steel inventory that are piling up at mills. And China's car sales plunged 92% in the first 2 weeks of February. They plunged 96% in the first week, with a daily average of only 811 units. This month may slide the sales of about 70%, the deliveries, resulting in a 40% drop in the first few months of 2020. Remember that China is the largest purchaser of vehicles in the world now as well. They surpassed the United States. And the World Health Organization is saying that with the Chinese quarantine that they did with these cities, it bought the world a few weeks to be able to prepare for the coronavirus. Russia is also saying that they're going to bar Chinese citizens from coming into China starting February 20th, which was Thursday of last week. In Libya, combatants are readying for a long conflict with foreign weapons flooding in. The East factions are closing oil ports in addition to making rival alliances wrangle over the largest petroleum reserves in Africa. So there's going to be an escalation there as well. That obviously can affect oil, even though the expectation of the demand of oil is going to come down. And obviously Libya, which has the biggest proven oil reserves and is a significant producer of oil, is going to be cut off the market. So you guys can see, even though production is going down, production in the U.S. is going up, and then demand is going down as well. That's why I told you guys last year I thought the expectation of of oil was going to go down. Russia's energy giant Rosneft has been Venezuela's main oil shipper. Now the U.S. sanctions are going to go against the Russian energy giant, further escalating the effort to oust the socialist paradise of Venezuela. And other than that, in the streets of Daegu, South Korea, the fourth largest city in South Korea with 2.5 million people, they were deserted on Thursday, as now there's been dozens caught with the new coronavirus after officials are describing a super spreading event in a local church. So you guys can see it's starting to spread to other countries as well. In unusual facts this week, in a recent Gallup poll, sample Americans, they took a sample and asked Americans if they felt better off financially than 3 years ago or not. 61% of respondents said yes, 36% no. And obviously this has to do to the ongoing economic growth and its economic recovery from the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009, which has been the longest recovery and the longest economic expansion in history, going into its 11th year. And thousands of containers of frozen pork, chicken, and beef are starting to pile up in a lot of Chinese ports, which truckers aren't able to ship them where they need to due to the fact that a lot of the cities have been cut off and there's been restrictions on the travel of people in China. A lot of ports are starting to lose electricity, in addition to telling boats that are coming in to go to other ports like Hong Kong and other ports in mainland China as well. Armenia is announcing that it's going to move to double its country tree cover to begin with 10 million trees planted in October 10th of 2020. It represents the global population of Armenians. And just to put that into perspective, after 25 years, the country celebrated its 6 millionth tree planting in late 2009. And Prime Minister from Ethiopia is stating that, I'm not even going to try to say his name, is stating that the 18th century church crown, once stolen from Ethiopia decades ago, has returned from the Netherlands. It was found in a suitcase over 20 years ago. Go figure, huh? That's a pretty interesting story. And it depicts the Christian Holy Trinity as well as Jesus Christ's disciples. And Uber has resumed service in Colombia. If you guys didn't know, they stopped their service a few weeks back. Now they made an agreement with the government to be able to go ahead and do that. And a lot of countries outside of the US, you guys can use a company called Didi, which is the Uber of China, essentially. That's the news for this week, guys. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to leave all your questions with the hashtag AskMarcello. We'll see you next week.